There's a mistake people make when they think about offenders like this. They look for someone reckless, someone unstable, someone who leaves the chaos behind. But when investigators finally connected Wyoming to Tennessee, what they found wasn't chaos. It was movement, a pattern that only makes sense if the person committing these crimes was never staying in one place. Welcome back, listeners, to Dark Dialogue, Rocky Mountain Reckoning, the series where we return to the crimes rooted deep in the dirt, rock, and snow of the American West. The cases that never really left the communities where they happened. The ones that lingered in sheriff's files and old newspaper archives, and in the quiet memories of people who remember exactly where they were when the news first spread across town.
Here we investigate the stories buried beneath prairie dust and mountain snowfall, cases carried on the wind across open rangeland, whispered along cattle fences, and passed down through generations of people who still want answers. These are the crimes that unfold along forgotten county roads, remote truck stops, and highways that stretch so far into the distance they almost disappear into the horizon. Places where someone can vanish, and for a long time, no one even knows their name.
So in the last episode, we established something critical. We had two victims in Wyoming, Irene Vasquez and Cindy Estrada, or Bitter Creek Betty and the I-90 Jane Doe, both of them linked by the same unknown DNA. And then we had a third case in Tennessee, Pamela Rose Aldridge McCall, with the exact same pattern of violence. What we didn't have was a suspect. So tonight, that changes because this is the point in the investigation where the question shifts away from what happened to these victims to who had the ability to move between all of these locations without being noticed. So, Angela, this is where this case stops being local.
And starts becoming something a lot bigger.
Exactly. Because once you map these locations, you have Wyoming, northern Wyoming, southern Wyoming, and then Tennessee. You're not looking at proximity anymore. You're looking at access, and that leads directly to one type of offender, and that is someone that lives on the road. So before we move any further into this case, we need to do something intentionally. We need to step briefly outside of the Rocky Mountain region.
It's a big step.
It's a big damn step.
Yeah.
And in this case, it's not a detour. It's part of the investigation because, like we said, one of the women connected to this case wasn't found in Wyoming or in Montana or in Idaho or anywhere else in the American West. She was found more than 1,000 miles away in Tennessee.
So we're not necessarily leaving the case, we're following where the case leads.
Exactly. And understand that we need to start with who she was. So Pamela Rose Aldridge McCall was 33 years old. She was born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa in 1958, and then later lived in Virginia. People that knew her described her as a free spirit. She lived a transient lifestyle, often traveling between different states, Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee. She moved along interstate routes and frequently accepted rides from long-haul truck drivers. She went by the name Pamela and sometimes by Rose. And much of her life at that point was built around movement, truck stops, highways, long stretches of road where people cross paths briefly and then keep going.
So her lifestyle already places her in the same kind of environment we've been talking about, those interstate corridors that you love so much.
It does. And it's important context, but we're going to stay focused on what we actually know. So in early March of 91, witnesses reported seeing Pamela at a Union 76 truck stop along Interstate 65 near Spring Hill, Tennessee. So she was seen with a semi-truck driver. And based on those accounts, investigators believe that she left that location in his truck. And that is the last confirmed point in her timeline. Then on March 10th of 1991, at approximately 12:30 in the afternoon, a passerby reported a body near the westbound shoulder of Saturn Parkway at the Port Royal Road ramp in Spring Hill. Responding officers arrived at the scene and located a woman lying on a grassy slope near a tree line, roughly 100 feet off the roadway. Does any of this sound familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Too familiar.
Very familiar. She had visible injuries to her face and her neck. Her clothing and her underwear were torn. And from the outset, the scene indicated a violent sexual assault.
Yeah. So at this point, law enforcement is looking at a homicide.
Yeah, from the very beginning.
Because no one chooses to be found that way.
No, it's pretty obvious that this is going to be a homicide. And the woman was identified as Pamela Rose McCall. I mean, at the time, she was actually unidentified. And just like our Wyoming Jane Doe, she stayed unidentified for a while and then was eventually identified. But following the discovery, investigators moved into the next phase of the case, and that's the autopsy and the initial forensic work. The medical examiner documented injuries to her neck that were consistent with manual strangulation. Her cause of death was officially ruled as strangulation. There were no findings that suggested accidental or natural cause or anything else. This was definitely a homicide. And the examination also confirmed another strange parallel in these cases, and that is that Pamela was approximately 24 weeks pregnant at the time of her death. And then obviously the fetus also died as a direct result of the attack.
So from the beginning, investigators know exactly how she died.
Yeah, they do. The cause of death is clear, but cause of death and suspect identification are two very different things. Additional findings supported what investigators had already observed at the scene. Her clothing and her undergarments were torn. This aligned with the conclusion that she'd been sexually assaulted. And during the autopsy, biological evidence was collected, including sperm recovered from her pantyhose that she was wearing, along with additional samples taken during the examination.
They actually had physical evidence tied to the person who did this.
They did. And that's going to become one of the most important parts of the case, because even in 1991, investigators recognized the value that evidence had, and they preserved it. So like I said a couple minutes ago, at the time of her discovery, Pamela was not immediately identified. She was initially treated as a Jane Doe. Investigators took fingerprints and they began circulating them across multiple different agencies. And about a month later, those prints were matched. And that's when she was identified as 33-year-old Pamela Rose Aldridge McCall from Virginia.
So now they have a name, but they still don't have a suspect.
Exactly. Same old freaking story that we just keep on telling over and over again. And that's where the early investigation starts to take shape. So investigators established that she had been hitchhiking and was last seen traveling with a truck driver from the nearby truck stop on Interstate 65. And so that detail shaped the whole working theory really early on in the investigation. She had been picked up by a truck driver and then killed sometime after leaving that location. And I can't imagine that it was very long, because it was in the same place. It was Spring Hill, Tennessee.
Yeah.
So, we don't have any clue where Irene Vasquez or Cindy Estrada were picked up from. So we have no idea how long they were in the truck.
Right.
But we can guess that Pamela was not in the truck with him for very long, because they never really left the area. So investigators canvassed the truck stop area. They interviewed potential witnesses. They spoke with truckers who may have been in the area at the time. They collected and they preserved any physical evidence that they were able to find, the clothing, the biological evidence, and anything that could be tested later.
So from an investigative standpoint, they're doing what they can with what they have.
Yeah, they really are. And this is where the limitation comes in, because even though they had a confirmed cause of death, they had evidence of sexual assault, they had biological evidence from the offender, they even had her last known contact point, but they didn't have a way to identify the person that was responsible. No match, no confession, no witness that anybody could name as a suspect. And without that, the case begins to stall. So over time, the investigation gradually went cold. But the critical piece is this: Again, the evidence did not disappear. The biological samples collected during the autopsy and the evidence preserved during that early investigation, all of it remained intact.
Okay, so even though the case is stalled, it wasn't lost.
Exactly. It was waiting. So now we got to go back in time just a little bit. Because before Pamela McCall was murdered in March of 91, there's one documented incident that investigators would later look back on, and it happened just weeks earlier, in February of 1991, in Wheeler County, Texas. A 21-year-old hitchhiker had accepted a ride in a truck, and at some point during that trip, the situation changed. According to case summaries and later reporting, the driver attacked her inside that truck. He struck her in the head. He restrained her hands. He bound her mouth. A sock was forced into her mouth and tape was used to hold it there. She was sexually assaulted and he attempted to strangle her.
Oof, so this is not ambiguous. This is a violent assault with control and restraint.
Yeah. And that's how it was treated by law enforcement at the time. The suspect in that case was this total piece of shit, Clark Perry Baldwin.
Yeah.
He was arrested, and during the investigation, he admitted to the sexual assault.
Really? We have a victim and an admission.
Yeah, they do. But unfortunately, what they don't have is they don't have a case that they can move forward with without the victim. And the victim had returned to Kansas.
God bless it.
And when the case moved towards prosecution, she did not come back to testify. Without that testimony, the case couldn't move forward. So the charge was ultimately dismissed, effectively not prosecuted for failure to move the case forward.
That's aggravating. Despite the severity and even his own admission, he walks away.
Yeah, he walks.
Gross.
And it's a tough one. I can't blame this woman. I mean,
yeah,
I really can't, but it sucks.
I mean, you think you'd be, you never know. You never know where you'd be until it happens.
I could never put myself into that situation. What she went through, she was violently sexually assaulted. It's a really freaking weird story. She was violently sexually assaulted, and then he lets her get dressed after he tried to strangle her. He lets her get dressed and then gives her the gun and says, "I would shoot me if I were you." And then I wish she would have, but she didn't. She made him let her get out of the truck and she took off running is what happened. It's a weird situation, but that's what happened. So no matter what, at that point in time, that case ended there. Obviously, no conviction. Trial was dismissed.
Yeah.
Or charges were dismissed. There was no trial, no further legal action. So now we need to stop for a second and just lay this out cleanly, because up to this point, we've been moving through a bunch of individual events. But investigations like this don't come together event by event. They come together when you line all of those events up and you look at what's between them. So let's rebuild the timeline, not as a story, but as a structure. So by early 91, we have a confirmed starting point. Asshat Baldwin is working as a long-haul truck driver, running routes across multiple regions, the Midwest, the Plains, the South, and into the Mountain West. And that establishes something immediately, and that's mobility. And then on February 18th, 1991, Texas, a 21-year-old hitchhiker is assaulted inside his truck, and she survives. He's arrested, he admits, and he walks.
So we have confirmed violence and then nothing stopping him afterwards.
Yeah, correct. That's a fixed point. And then early March 91, Pamela McCall is seen at a truck stop along Interstate 65 in Tennessee in the company of a truck driver, and that's the last confirmed sighting. March 10th of 1991, Pamela is found murdered off the Saturn Parkway, manual strangulation, sexual assault.
So to sum up, we have two events close together, Texas and then Tennessee.
Yes. And that proximity is important. And now we're going to move forward. late 1991 into early 1992, we don't have a last seen for Irene Vasquez, but forensic evidence tells us that she was likely killed sometime between late 1991 and early in the winter of 1992. And then on March 1st of 92, her body is discovered at Bitter Creek along Interstate 80 in Wyoming. And then around February 1992, Cindy Estrada is killed. And again, we don't know her last seen time. But on April the 13th of 92, her body is found along Interstate 90 near Sheridan, Wyoming. So, I mean, you could see this is like February, March. I mean, it's just like, what is there, like a year in between? And then it's just boom, 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 boom.
So it goes Texas, Tennessee, Wyoming, less than a year.
Yeah, exactly. And those are the points that we can absolutely stand on. But here's the problem.
Everything always a problem.
Always a problem with these asshats. Everything that we just laid out are the moments where the case becomes visible. What we don't have are all the stuff that happened in between. So what we do not know is where the initial contact happened in pretty much any of these cases. Pamela McCall, we can surmise was the truck stop. We know obviously where he picked up the rape victim, but as far as Irene Vasquez and Cindy Estrada go, we have no clue. We don't know exactly how long the victims were with the offender before the attack. We don't know where the actual killings took place. We don't know how many interactions never resulted in a reported crime. We don't know how many freaking rape victims there are out there, or obviously unidentified murder victims.
Right. So we're only seeing the points where something went wrong enough to leave evidence behind.
Exactly. We're seeing endpoints. We're not seeing the full timeline. And that's the distinction that's important, because when you look at this on paper, it can feel like a bunch of isolated events, February, March, months later, then Wyoming. But when you step back, what you're actually looking at is a series of confirmed points, all connected by unknown movement. And this is where it becomes important to be precise. We're not filling in those gaps, and we're not going to assume what happened inside them, but we can say this: the timeline that we do have fits inside a continuous period of movement.
Meaning there's no break and there's no clear stop.
Right. There's no point in this timeline where we can say for sure he was not active here. There is only confirmed activity and silence. So when you look at this period from early 1991 through early 1992, what you're actually dealing with is two timelines. The timeline that we can prove and the timeline that we can't see. And right now, we're standing at the edge of both of them. So up to this point, the timeline moves. Texas, Tennessee, Wyoming, and then 1992, there is one more moment where asshat Baldwin surfaces. Not in an arrest, not in a new case, but in a statement. So during a totally unrelated homicide investigation in Iowa that year, 1992, his name comes up in interviews. And during that process, investigators speak to his estranged wife, and she tells them something very specific, that at some point, Baldwin had bragged to her about killing a girl out west, strangling her and throwing her out of his truck.
Do they know who he's talking about?
No, and that's the problem. There's no name, there's no date, there's no location tied to that statement. And at that point in time, there's no known case that investigators can confidently match it to. So it gets documented, and then it just sits.
So even something that specific just goes nowhere.
Nowhere.
That is awful.
Isn't it? I mean, it sucks. I don't know that they could have done anything. Mm-hmm. If you look at it honestly. I mean, what are they going to do? It's just out west. That's all big area, right? So
it's so simple to find out west.
Right.
Come on, man.
And in 92, that statement by itself is not enough to build a case. There's no DNA to link anything. No identified victims connected to it. No structure tying the multiple events together. So it stays where a lot of information like that ends up, and that's in a file somewhere. But I do got to say, because I'm sure that people are wondering, what's up with this homicide investigation? I couldn't tell you. I freaking dug and dug and dug.
How dare you dangle that carrot?
Is all I can say is that I can confirm it wasn't him that was being investigated for killing somebody. It was somebody else. And his name came up as maybe a witness or an accomplice or an acquaintance, or somehow, I don't know how his name got drawn in, but from what I was able to determine.
It seems suspicious and convenient.
Well, not really. Not as we learn more about this guy. He's a criminal piece of shit. So the fact that he might know somebody else that committed a murder is not that far-fetched at all.
A little band of.
Well, he's a criminal
jokers,
and he runs with criminals. I mean, yeah. So it's not, I don't know. And again, I don't know the specifics of that. I know that he was involved in like some counterfeiting and shit. So obviously he's not running with the best group of people, but I couldn't tell you what the investigation was. Is all I can say is he was not the target of the investigation, which I think is important just to shed a little more light on why that statement wasn't acted upon. First of all, it really couldn't be acted upon. Second of all, it's not like they've got a convicted murderer sitting in front of them.
Right.
It's just a statement that, so.
All right, then.
But this is where everything changes, and not because something happens, but because nothing does. After 1992, the timeline goes quiet. Not because the cases are solved and not because investigators stop working, but because there's nothing new to move them forward. In Tennessee, Pamela McCall's case remains open. The evidence is preserved, but there is no suspect. There's no usable DNA profile, at least with the technology at that time. In Wyoming, the two victims remain unidentified, Bitter Creek Betty and the I-90 Jane Doe. Investigators collect the evidence. They circulate the fingerprints. They compare the missing persons reports. Nothing comes back.
In all three active cases, they're going nowhere.
Exactly. And this is what a cold case actually looks like. It's not abandoned. It's not forgotten, but it is stalled. The files are kept. The evidence is stored. It's occasionally reviewed, but without something new, a name, a match, a connection, something, the investigation can't move. So from roughly 1992 into the early 2000s, these cases enter what you would call a plateau. No arrests, no confirmed suspects, no public breakthroughs, just three separate cases in three different places. A homicide in Tennessee, two unidentified victims in Wyoming, and a statement in Iowa that doesn't connect to anything yet.
So all the pieces are there, they just aren't connecting.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it. The evidence exists, the statements exist, the victims exist, but there's no mechanism yet to tie them all together.
It's terrible.
God, it sucks. And for nearly 20 years, these cases sat exactly where we left them.
I am pissed for those families.
Oh, man, I can't even. Well, for Pamela McCall, her family at least got her and buried her.
Yeah.
But for the Wyoming Jane Does, Cindy Estrada was identified less than a year ago.
I know.
She died in 1992. She was just identified
in 25.
Last year.
2025.
It's nuts, man. It's crazy. Then in 2012, something changed. Not in the field and not from a witness and not from a confession, from the lab. So back in 92, investigators in Wyoming had done the work. They collected the biological evidence from both of the scenes. From the Sheridan County case, what would later be identified as Cindy Estrada, they had a paper towel recovered from the victim's genital area, along with swabs that were taken during the autopsy. They knew that those items contained semen, but At that time, the DNA results were incomplete, just not usable. And then from the Bitter Creek case, Irene Vasquez also had semen recovered during her autopsy. Again, it was preserved. Again, limited by technology of the time.
So the same story that we hear all the time. The evidence is there. It just can't be used.
Exactly.
It's just hanging out. Hey, look at me.
Yep. And it's got to be so frustrating for investigators because...
Frustrating for us.
Yeah, but I mean, it's frustrating for us, but you think about like all this shit. Like I never sat around and thought, boy, I can't wait till they invent a cell phone because I could,
True.
You know, I mean,
true.
But with DNA, you're like, with all of this shit,
yeah.
When it comes to this, you are like, I think they're going to come up with the technology to do this one day. I can't wait.
This is going to be important someday.
But for these investigators that pour their heart and souls into these cases and we've talked about several of them, and for them to like have to retire and then have to die before they have these answers, knowing that one day technology is going to give them the answer to this case that has plagued them for sometimes like 20 or 30 years of their career.
So put you on the spot. Who was the one who on his deathbed said, at least I'll get to know now?
Lou Schmidt.
Good job.
Yep. Lou Schmidt, the investigator in the Jean Bonnet case.
Not that I knew, but I knew you would.
Yep. So by 2012, DNA technology had advanced enough for the Wyoming State Crime Lab to go back to that evidence. And this time, they were able to do something that they couldn't do in 1992. They developed a strong, usable male DNA profile from the evidence in the Sheridan County case, and they compared it to the profile from the Bitter Creek case, and the result was a direct match. The same male DNA was present in both investigations.
So finally, in that moment, those two cases stopped being separate.
They do. Up to that point, Sweetwater County and Sheridan County were each carrying their own cases. Two different victims, two very different locations, two different investigations. After 2012, that all changes. Now they have one unknown male, two victims, two crime scenes along Wyoming interstates. Both victims had been sexually assaulted. Both had been strangled and left along highway corridors.
So this is the first time they can say this is one offender.
Yeah, for the first time, that's not just a theory, it's evidence. And honestly, I can't say that it was even a theory before that. I never saw anything where they said,
maybe these are linked. Yeah.
I mean, and why would they really?
Exactly.
Just because we've talked about it. We happen to live in Wyoming, so we know these locations very well. But like we discussed in the first episode, these are literally on opposite sides of a very large state.
It's not the first thing you put together. It's got to be related to that one.
Yeah.
Hours away.
Exactly. Right now, if there's a murder in Cody and there's another one in Cheyenne, you're not going to say it's probably the same guy. You're just going to be like, so there was a murder in Cheyenne. I heard there was a murder in Cheyenne. I mean, it's possible, but that's not the leap you're going to make. No. I don't know that they ever made that leap for sure. But what I can say is by 2012, they know it's one douchebag. But even with that breakthrough, there's still a limit. The DNA profile does not match anyone in CODIS. There was no name attached to it, no known offender. So what investigators had in 2012 was this: a confirmed link between two homicides and an unknown man that was responsible for both of them.
They've gone from two unanswered questions to one, but it's still unanswered.
Exactly.
Very frustrating.
And so that's where the case sits. Now, before we move forward, just a quick second. If you're listening right now, follow the show, leave a rating or a review, and share it with someone who would actually care about these cases. That's how this grows, and that's how more people start to pay attention. If you want to go deeper into what we're doing, behind the scenes breakdowns, additional casework, and the conversations that don't always make it into the main episodes, you can find that through Patreon, through Coffee, and through Substack. And if you're already supporting the show, we appreciate you.
And we want to know your thoughts. So leave a comment.
Leave a comment, drop us an email, all the things.
All the things.
All the things. All right, so let's get back into it.
You've been hanging out with me too long. All the things.
I've said that for years.
I was taking blame for that. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay, it's all your fault.
It is.
So by 2012, Wyoming has something that it never had before. Not a suspect and not a name, but a single confirmed DNA profile. One unknown male linked both homicides. And that changes how the case is understood, but it does not solve it. So once that profile is developed, it gets entered into CODIS, which, if you don't know, that's the national DNA database that's used by law enforcement all over the country. And from that point forward, the system does the work. Every new profile that's entered is automatically compared against it.
So it's not just sitting in a file anymore. It's finally active.
Exactly. But here's the reality of it. A database only works if the right profile gets entered into it.
I knew there was a catch.
And in this case, that doesn't happen. Days pass, then weeks, and then months, and then years. No hit, no match, no name. That DNA profile, the one that definitively links two murders, just sits there.
Even with the technology finally catching up, it still doesn't move the case forward.
Not yet, because CODIS can only match what's already in it. And at this point, whoever left that DNA is not in CODIS. So the investigation reaches a new kind of standstill. Not because there's no evidence, but because there's no connection. They now know that the same man committed both murders. They have his DNA. They can identify him instantly if he ever appears in the system, but until that happens, he remains exactly what he was before, unknown.
So now the case is waiting on something outside of Wyoming.
Exactly. And so that's the shift. At this point, the investigation cannot move forward on its own. It needs something else to enter the system, something that carries the same DNA. And when that happens, everything changes. So like I said, for years, the DNA profile sat in the system, linked to two murders, but with no name attached to it. And then a new profile enters. And this time, the system responds. The DNA profile from Pamela McCall's case is uploaded. And then when it runs in CODIS, it does not come back empty. It hits, not to a person, but to a profile that's already in the system. The same unknown male linked to both of the Wyoming homicides.
So now it's not just Wyoming anymore?
No, now it's 3 cases, 3 different crime scenes, all tied to the same piece of shit. At that point, investigators still don't have a name. The DNA match does not match anybody in CODIS, so they move to the next tool available, investigative genetic genealogy. So instead of looking for an exact match, they start looking for relatives. Genealogists take the unknown DNA profile and they compare it against consumer genealogy databases, Ancestry.com, 23andMe, all of them. They're searching for partial matches, people that share the same segments of DNA, which would indicate a common ancestor somewhere in the past.
So they're not finding him directly, they're finding him by people connected to him moving backwards.
Exactly.
Okay.
And from there, they start building. And it's a long, arduous process. It really is, man. These people that do this,
arduous.
They spend so much time building these.
I have great respect for these people.
I do too. The matches begin pointing toward a family network based out of Iowa. And from those partial matches, genealogists construct a family tree, working outward and then narrowing back in, eliminating branches, focusing on lines that fit, things like age, sex, geography, until that humongous pool of possible relatives becomes a much smaller group of viable individuals.
Yeah, now it's not thousands of people, it's a handful of people.
Right. And inside of that group, one name starts to stand out from all the rest. And that name is Clark Perry Baldwin.
You used his real name.
Yeah, asshat,
It's
piece
hard.
of shit.
It's hard for you to do.
I hate this guy. So when investigators begin looking at Baldwin against what they know from the case, several things line up immediately. First of all, he's in the right age range. He was born in 1961. He worked as a long-haul truck driver. He was on the road during the exact time frame of these crimes, 1991 into 1992. And he had a prior arrest in 1991 for the sexual assault and attempted strangulation of a hitchhiker in Texas.
So now it's not just a name from a family tree. It's someone who actually fits the case.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine being one of these genealogists and you're building this family tree and you're like, I'm suspicious about this guy. And then you work with law enforcement and they pull the record and we know that we're looking for somebody that raped and strangled women. And now we have somebody that was arrested for raping and strangling somebody. And you're like, son of a bitch, we got him. I mean,
I can imagine how good that would feel. Like it would make up for all the time just toiling.
It would make it all worth it.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, they had to have been jumping up and down, and the investigators. I don't know how many investigators, we're talking about a long period of time.
Yeah.
And so I can't tell
you. How many
you
hands it changed into before?
Exactly. And how many investigators were involved and were like, we finally got a name on this son of a bitch.
Yeah. And if the past people are still alive, they get to call them and tell them.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So at this point, investigators don't have any kind of confirmation, but they do have something they've never had before. And that is one specific individual who fits both the genetic pathway and the known facts of the investigation. But all of that is not enough. They still need the proof. In early 2020, federal agents and Iowa investigators begin surveillance in Waterloo. That's where Asshat lives. They're not there to question him, and they're not there to confront him. They're there to collect.
Because they still need his DNA directly.
Exactly. This is what's often called a trash DNA operation.
Yeah.
Agents follow Asshat's movements. They're watching him. They're waiting for opportunities. Anything he discards, anything he leaves behind becomes potential evidence. Mm-hmm. They recover items from his trash outside of his home, objects that may carry his DNA, but they don't stop there. At one point, they follow him into a Walmart store and they watch him use the shopping cart. So after he leaves, they collect the cart and they swab the handle. Touch DNA for something as ordinary as just where his hands were while he was shopping.
They're building multiple samples and not just relying on one.
Exactly. And that's important because what they're looking for isn't a possibility. They're wanting confirmation.
Exactly.
So those collected samples are sent to the lab. Analysts extract the DNA from the discarded items and they build a profile and then they compare it to the DNA that's been sitting in the system for freaking 20 odd years.
Patiently waiting.
The same profile that linked to Pamela McCall, the same that was found at Bitter Creek, the same profile found along Interstate 90. And the result is match across all tested markers.
Leaving no gaps.
No. At this point, there's no unknown male anymore. They now have three things all pointing to the same asshat. A DNA profile linking three crime scenes, a genealogical pathway leading to Baldwin, and now a direct DNA match from his own discarded items. Independent, confirmable, and consistent across every comparison. That's the threshold. That's what turns a theory into a case. So once the DNA is confirmed, the investigation moves quietly. On May 6, 2020, a coordinated team comes together in Waterloo, Iowa. There's federal agents, Iowa investigators, Wyoming DCI, Tennessee prosecutors, all there for the same reason, to take one total pile of shit into custody. Clark Perry Baldwin is living in a 6th-floor apartment in downtown Waterloo. A small unit, a normal building, nothing about it stands out. Investigators move in that morning. Two of them, wired for audio, ride the elevator up. They walk down the hallway and they stop at his door. They knock and they wait.
So this isn't a raid. It's controlled, and it had to have been the longest elevator ride ever.
Could you imagine 6 floors?
Just counting them down.
Oh, man. Yeah. So after a few minutes, the door opens. And just like that, the man they've been building this case around is standing in front of them. And he's
in the hallway?
Fat, nasty piece of shit, too.
They don't even have to go to his door?
No, he opens the door.
Okay.
They went and they knocked on his door. He opened the door.
Okay.
And they took him into custody without
incident. How beautiful. He's just standing there. Okay.
Yeah, no, they knocked on the door. He opened the door. He didn't fight him. There was no resistance, no escalation, just a quiet arrest at the end of a very long investigation. So at the same time, charges are announced out of Tennessee. 2 counts of first-degree murder. 1 for Pamela Rose Aldridge McCall and 1 for her unborn child.
Good.
Both tied directly to the DNA evidence recovered in 91 and then confirmed decades later.
So Tennessee moved first.
Yeah, and that's important for what comes next. But at the same time, Wyoming files its own charges. 2 separate homicide cases. 2 victims, the woman known for years as Bitter Creek Betty, now we know as Irene Vasquez, and the woman known as the I-90 Jane Doe, who we now know as Cindy Estrada, both tied to the same offender. And in Sheridan County, there's an additional charge for the death of Cindy Estrada's unborn child.
So now we're looking at multiple victims across multiple states, all tied to one asshat.
Exactly.
Okay.
Baldwin is booked into
It was my turn to say.
It was definitely your turn, and he is such an asshat. Baldwin is booked into the Black Hawk County Jail in Iowa. He's held on out-of-state warrants. From there, investigators have to decide where this case starts. So Tennessee and Wyoming coordinate, and they agree he'll be extradited to Tennessee first to face charges in Pamela McCall's case, and then Wyoming will follow. After nearly 30 years,
jeez,
3 separate investigations in 3 different places, the same DNA leads to the same door. And on May 6, 2020, that door opens. So when you step back and you look at all of this, what we actually have is a very small window, a window that runs from early 91 into early 92. Inside that window, we can place this piece of shit. We can track movement, and we can tie him to violence. We have the surviving victim in Texas, a murder in Tennessee, 2 murders along Wyoming highways, all within roughly a year. That's what we can prove. But here's the part that doesn't sit clearly. The window exists inside something way larger because Clark Perry Baldwin wasn't on the road for 1 year. He was a long-haul truck driver. He started driving truck in 1979 to 1980, and he continued at least into the mid-90s and possibly into the 2000s. He had a candle business that he had to start in the 2000s. Yes.
A candle business?
Yeah, candle making business. Yeah, I know. I had to double check everything.
I'm so confused.
Piece of shit was a long haul truck driver, a counterfeiter, a candle maker.
Candle maker.
So anyway, that's years of cross country travel, thousands upon thousands of miles, multiple interstate corridors running through the Midwest, the South, and the Mountain West.
So what we're looking at is just a slice of a much bigger timeline.
Exactly. We know at least some of what happened in that 1 year span. So we know how he operated in at least one surviving case, the rape victim out of Texas. We know what the crime scenes look like. We know where victims were found. And we know how those cases connect. But outside of that window, we don't know how many times this piece of shit crossed those same routes. We don't know how many encounters never turned into a reported crime, how many victims were never found or have never been identified.
So annoyingly, what we have isn't the full picture.
Not even close. It's just what was left behind. And that's the part that matters, because when you look at a case like this, it's easy to focus on the answer, the name, the arrest. But the reality is the answer only exists where evidence survived long enough for it to be connected. Everything else, we just don't see. What we do see are the people who were left behind in that window. Pamela, Irene, Cindy, 3 women whose lives intersected with the same man in 3 different places, and for years, they were not connected. Tonight, they are. That's where we turn now. This is I'm Coming Home from the J.J. Hawk Band. And this is Pamela, Irene, Cindy, and the woman who survived. Pamela Rose Aldridge McCall was 33 years old. She lived a life built around movement, traveling from state to state, meeting people along the way, finding her way through a world that didn't always make space for her. She was a daughter. She was known as Pamela and sometimes as Rose. And in March of 1991, her life was taken from her along a stretch of road in Tennessee. She was also a mother, 24 weeks pregnant. And in that moment, 2 lives were lost. Irene Vasquez, for years known only as Bitter Creek Betty, a name given to her because no one knew who she was. No one knew where she came from, and no one knew who was waiting for her. She was found off Interstate 80 in Wyoming, left in the cold, unidentified for decades. But she was not Bitter Creek Betty. She was Irene, a woman who had lived a life before that moment, a woman whose name deserved to be spoken. Cindy Arlene Estrada, for years known only as the I-90 Jane Doe. She was found along a highway outside of Sheridan. Another woman without a name, another life reduced to a location and a case file. But she was not a Jane Doe. She was Cindy. She had a history, a family, a life that mattered. And she too was pregnant. And like Pamela, that life was taken right alongside her own. And then there's the woman who survived, a 21-year-old hitchhiker, a young woman who made a decision to get into a truck, a decision that countless people have made safely without consequence. She was attacked, beaten, restrained, sexually assaulted, and nearly strangled to death. But she lived. She fought, she endured, and she made it out. And because she survived, we have a glimpse into what the others never had the chance to tell. Not just what happened, but how it happened. And that matters because for years these stories were separate. Pamela in Tennessee, Irene in Wyoming, Cindy in Wyoming, and an unnamed survivor in Texas. No connection, no shared answer, just distance and silence. But now, they are no longer separate. They are part of the same story. And more importantly, they are no longer unknown. Pamela, Irene, Cindy, and a survivor whose voice still carries forward. They are no longer just locations or case files or fragments of evidence. They are people, and they are remembered.
And if the night tries to hold me down, I'll rise again. I've turned around. The light ahead, it burns so bright. I'm running home tonight. I'm coming home tonight. Breaking free from the endless fight. Every tear, every step I've known led me back where I belong.